What's up, guys? Today I am doing a tier list for anabolics. Thought this would be a fun one to try and kind of roll through some of my thoughts on a lot of anabolics really quickly for you guys because I get a lot of questions on this shit. And it's kind of easier to just rattle off my generalizations on them without giving like specifics. Obviously, anything I say here, any of the rankings I give, it varies wildly person to person. Someone might respond really well to EQ and really poorly to Mast or Primo, and it's a better option for them. Generally speaking, probably not the case, and that's kind of what I'm relying on here is my generalizations. Everything can be changed individually as needed. So, starting off, we're going to start with the best. I mean, you can't beat test. Test is best. They say that for a reason, right? There's a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot. There's a couple compounds that come close, but nothing is really ever going to be able to beat testosterone purely because it's just the grandfather of all steroids. So you can't really beat it for anything. Proof of use, the safety, the studies that have been done on it, it's just you can't beat that. It's the most well-known, well-understood compound out of all of these, I would argue. Second to that, or second up on the list, we're going to say nandrolone. Okay. Now, I could have split this out into NPP and DECA, and I would probably have put them in two different categories based on that split. If we're talking DECA, I would say okay. If we're talking NPP, good. It's overhyped kind of as, categorically, but not to the extent that Tren is. We'll get to that in a minute. I will say it's good because it's a really useful addition if you need to get your total anabolic load up or you need to add a third compound. Maybe you tolerate 19 NORs really well and you need to run something in the off season, or you have some total milligram amount left to fill in and you want to implement nandrolone. It's good for that. Otherwise, I wouldn't say it's great or at the very top as a god tier compound, but it's pretty good. Insulin, good. I'll expand on insulin a little bit once we touch on growth hormone. In fact, let's just do that now. Growth hormone is godly. It's just insane. I mean, you can basically run growth hormone high all the time with the only limit being your wallet. There's obviously some, health concerns there. You can't push things to the point where you're getting crazy bad side effects and then continue to try and manage that forever. I sometimes recommend running growth hormone as high as you can without side effects for as long as you can. There's arguably some reasons to pull it back in a deficit or a diet phase purely from a health marker perspective and just kind of letting the body relax a little bit because we're not going to need as much then. But if you're growing, freaking crank it. And it's super, super beneficial for a lot of different reasons. But mostly, I think young guys tolerate it with very few side effects. The side effects tend to get a little worse as you age in terms of you're going to notice them more. But for young guys, don't be under this impressionable idea of, oh, I'll just grow as much as I can with anabolics and then I'll just add in growth hormone when I hit a wall. Start growth hormone early if you can afford it and if it works for what you're trying to do, right? Then I really recommend running that earlier rather than later in your career. That being said, awesome compound. Just overall, growth hormone is great. Insulin is good. And the reason, going back to what I was saying initially, that it's good is that it has a lot of synergy with growth hormone. And both of these, growth hormone and insulin together, have a lot of synergy with testosterone and just your other traditional anabolics, right? Whereas insulin and growth hormone aren't anabolics in their own right. They have a lot of synergy to the point that I've felt that it's worthwhile including them in this list. And insulin basically counteracts or can help to counteract a lot of the negative side effects of growth hormone, specifically and primarily glucose and A1C increase that you're going to see from running high doses of growth hormone. So that alone is a huge benefit and the main reason I think a lot of people will need to run it. But there are other synergies too that increase the efficiency of the growth hormone. And these things kind of play back and forth with each other to have this synergistic relationship. So it's good for that, but it's not this crazy, start taking insulin, you're going to add 40 pounds in 6 weeks kind of thing that the internet makes it out to be. It's not that. Okay. And you shouldn't be utilizing it as such. DHB. I'm going to put this in the garbage category. The only reason I even put this on the list is I see so many people talking about DHB. They call it Tren Light. They call it EQ on steroids. And from a pharmacology perspective, I think the second of those two is most accurate. But alongside DHB being, boldenone or equipoise on steroids, comes the side effects that you would have with boldenone. Maybe not to the same extent, but I think that there's just a lot more negatives to running DHB. Let me rephrase that. A lot more potential negatives to running DHB versus something with a better safety profile that you can run in a higher milligram amount, that's more well studied, or if it's not more well studied, at least more well known in terms of anecdotal evidence that we have from years and years of it being used in bodybuilding. Will this maybe change in the future where I could see this moving up to an okay compound or something if we have studies run on it, if we have 10, 15, 20 plus years of usage in the future of guys using it from anecdotal experience and kind of responses to that from a health perspective? Yeah, maybe. But for now, I'm going to say it's garbage and it's not really needed. There's not really a point. I'm going to put Mast in the great category. And the reason I put it in great is that it does everything that Primo does, just not as perfectly. For that reason, Primo is godly. Primo is just top tier. You can't beat Primo. I will typically recommend for people, though, if you are unsure about your Primo in terms of quality, sourcing, that kind of thing, get Masteron. Because more often than not, if you're buying Primo and you're unsure if it's legitimate Primo, you don't have, a guarantee on that, it's probably just going to be a repackaged Masteron that you're paying through the fucking nose for anyway. So Masteron does everything that Primo does for the most part. I would say with like 85 to 90% efficiency, maybe 80 to 90. Okay. So it's good. It's great, but it's not as great. It's not as awesome as Primo is. Okay. If you can afford to run Primo and you can find legit Primo, run Primo instead of Mast. The reason being, to kind of latch on to Primo here, it has low side effects from 90% of people. It is a very safe compound. It's one of those compounds that's been run for a very long time, and we know a lot about it. And you can run it in really high milligram totals to boost that total anabolic load, which is ultimately going to really be your primary driver of growth when we're talking about raising compound levels in an off season or a growth phase in order to elicit new tissue growth. So because of that, we can run this really high in conjunction with high growth and moderate to high testosterone based on your personal tolerance, and have just an awesome stack. I mean, literally looking at the godly tier right now, these three plus some insulin is basically the best you're going to get for an off-season stack. You don't even need to add in Angelo. Okay, you're just looking at these three and insulin. So these four here: test, growth, primo, and insulin. Boom. There's your off-season stack. That's it. Period. I could end that right here and say that's probably the best recommendation for 90% of people who will ever hop on anabolics and want to compete at a high level. But that's not where we're ending the list. So let's go to Anavar. I think this is I put a few orals on this list. Anavar, I'm going to put in the great category, I think. The reason I put Anavar as great is that it has a lot of good benefits in terms of like its applications. It can be used by men and women. It is a compound that is great at preserving strength and works really well in a dieting phase. If you need some strength retention going into a show, or those last few weeks of prep or whatever, it's really, really beneficial. It's also pretty mild in terms of its side effects when compared to other orals. Something like Anadrol, let's say, I'm a little conflicted about this. I'm going to go ahead and say Anadrol is, I want to say garbage, but I feel like people are going to rip me to shreds if I do. I think I'll say okay. I think I'm going to say okay with Anadrol because it's not as bad as other alternatives or other orals as far as the negatives, but it kind of has all of the same negatives as other orals. What I mean by that is there's really no reason you would ever need to run this. There's no point in running an oral in the off season because it's just going to have a higher impact on your health in a negative way, which is going to cut your off season or growth phase shorter than it needs to be really truly productive. But there's also not really a point in running Anadrol in a prep phase either. You could argue maybe there's a couple points, you're like, let's say you're 6 weeks out, you're not really worried about any water retention at that point because you're going to drop it before the show anyway. So you just run it for strength and mass, muscle preservation at 6 weeks out. Yeah, that's fine. But I would then argue, like, why do that instead of Anavar? Because it's going to be more stressful on your body running the Anadrol. So why not use Anavar instead? I guess maybe you could say it's because of your access to this compound if you can't get Anavar for some reason, or Anavar is cost prohibitive or something. But I think that's probably a silly argument because there's not that big of a difference between the two in terms of cost. And you don't see Anavar as, it's not like Primo where it's faked a lot. So I don't know. I just see Anavar as the better alternative in that kind of a prep situation. And again, in an off season, you're never going to need any oral. You shouldn't. So it kind of loses what its main benefit is, and that it allows you to just kind of, I think a lot of people think it helps you put on mass very quickly when the reality is most of that is just water retention. So I think it's okay. It's not the worst, but it's all right. Dianabol, on the other hand, is fucking garbage. There is no reason you should ever run this, ever, in this day and age. People are like, well, Arnold ran it. I don't give a fuck. You're talking about something that was what, 50 years ago? Not that long ago, but 40 years ago. It's like, that's completely fucking irrelevant in today's world of bodybuilding. It is not a useful compound at all in terms of what we need. There is no reason to run this over just more tests if that's really what you want to do. It's just completely silly. It doesn't have a purpose. There's no reason you should ever run it in a prep setting. And there's, again, no reason to ever run an oral in an off season. So it's fucking worthless. EQ, it's going in the okay category. I would typically be pretty predisposed to putting this in the garbage category, but I'm going to say okay for a point that I made at the very beginning of this video. And that is, some people do tolerate EQ very, very, very well, and other things very, very, very poorly. I have seen cases of people who tolerate Primo and Mast very bad. We start them on Primo and Mast, or one or the other rather, and we know that it's legit. You know, whatever they're using is absolutely legit, and they have horrible blood work. It's just, it comes back really fucking bad. And then we switch these out for Primo, or sorry, for EQ, just to fill in that total milligram amount, and their blood work is great. That's a really fringe case. That's like less than 5% of people have that happen, I would say, in my experience, but it is something that can happen. It is an outcome that's there. So for that reason, I think EQ can be beneficial for people who, for whatever reason, tolerate Primo or Mast really poorly. EQ can be a great way to fill things in if they tolerate it well, because it's another compound where if you do tolerate it well, it can be pretty limited on the side effects, and you can run the milligram total really high without major issues. Generally speaking, though, it's the other way around, where people don't tolerate EQ well, their blood work goes to shit on it, and Primo and Mast instead are the much more well-tolerated compounds, which is, again, why I'm putting this in the okay category. Last but not least, the one that people have probably been eyeing throughout this whole video, Tren. Good old Tren. I am going to put Tren, my whole heart wants to put Tren in fucking garbage. It really does. It's become the social media sweetheart of the anabolic world, and I fucking hate it for that, because there's so many reasons that is the wrong perspective to take. And I can rip that to shreds, and I will. But I think I'll put it in the okay category. Maybe good. We'll put it in good. I think I'm being a little unfair because of my personal opinion on how Tren is viewed nowadays. So I'll put Tren in good. I think it would be a little bit undeserving of okay if I'm putting Nandrolone in good. Okay, so I'll put Tren in good as well. The reason I want to go good, it's great at what it does in terms of strength, muscle retention, lean tissue retention, and slightly assisting with leaning you out during a prep diet, whatever. You shouldn't really be running it during like a mini cut or an off-season diet phase, but during a prep is when you would implement this. The problem I have with Tren is what I was just talking about. It is the social media sweetheart where everybody is making it out to be this, like, if you start taking Tren, you're going to turn into Ronnie Coleman in 3.5 weeks. And it's absolutely not fucking that. And I see so many people all the time, whether they come to me or I just see videos about it, where they're like, yeah, I'm on 800 mgs of Tren right now, 60 mgs of Anadrol or 100 mgs of Anadrol. And I'm like, that's so fucking beyond reckless for your health. Your longevity in the sport is not existing. I get that you might run that and you might see some crazy changes. Still not as crazy as what people say, but you might see some crazy physique changes. But that's so short-sighted, especially when it comes to how you have to learn to manage your health if you're going to be running anabolics for 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the cases of some of these guys who have a really long career. You're not managing your health. You might think you're invincible and you think that you can last forever on those kind of things. It's not going to happen. Something has to go eventually, especially if you're one of those guys who's running, like I said, 800 mgs of tren in the off season when it's completely fucking unneeded on top of all these other compounds, or even on its own. I guess looking at it in a vacuum, tren is like great at what it does, to my original point, but it's also incredibly, incredibly high in side effects, both physically and mental. It's one of the few anabolics that really has this crazy mental drain on a lot of people. And running in the off season is just nonsensical because it's like you're running something that's going to impact, I mean, just first and foremost, from a mental and kind of, not even a physical perspective, your sleep. And then that sleep deterioration affects your physical performance. It's like you're cutting into the most beneficial part of your off season that you can have, which is additional recovery. So why would you fucking do that? I also think, to take this a step further, people glorify tren too much in a prep or diet setting. They look to tren as this, like, I'm just going to crank the fucking tren and forget about everything else. And that works for like a week until you realize I'm now getting 4 hours of sleep a night. I'm irritated. I'm stressed as fuck. My performance is down. It feels like it might be up because of the aggression in the gym, but on paper, it's actually fucking down. And your health, you just lose control of your health doing that. You don't need to crank tren even in a prep setting. In fact, I don't want to say most, that's an overstatement. I would say a lot of guys don't even use tren. A lot of the high level guys that you see competing don't need tren to get in shape. They just don't. It's not this crazy, it's not going to make the difference that a properly executed off season into a properly executed prep with everything, dotting your I's, crossing your T's, and doing everything as you should. It's not going to make the same difference as that would just by cranking tren and hoping that it helps. That's so stupid. And again, not everybody even needs it at all, but when people do add it, high level pros who are actually good at what they do, they're probably adding in like 150 to 300 milligrams tops per week, tops, on top of everything else they're running. Yeah, other anabolics are going to trend very fucking high going into a show, but tren isn't one of them. It's just a little additional kind of value add. And if you have good tren, legit tren, that's all you fucking need. You don't need to go and try and run 800 milligrams of it. Fuck no way. If it's legit, 150 to 300 is all you fucking need. Also, to kind of touch on that dosage, my philosophy is kind of the same when it comes to nandrolone in the off season. I don't ever typically personally run nandrolone higher than 150 to 300, but that's kind of what I see most guys. A lot of guys don't even run nandrolone anymore. They'll just use test, primo, mast, some combination of those plus growth and insulin. That's really it. It's just more so about running things that are allowing you to get a total higher milligram amount throughout your weekly milligram intake of anabolics while keeping your recovery high, keeping your effort high, and keeping your food intake high, and managing all of those functions of the body that allow you to have optimal recovery in order to grow. If you do that, you don't need to take these things that, supposedly allow you to gain 4 pounds per week, like people on Reddit would have you think. There's no point in running things that are a higher risk profile at a higher milligram amount when you can run safer things at a higher milligram amount and have a much better effect in your off season. So yeah, a little bit of a rant there towards the end on the 19 NORs, but overall, guys, that's the anabolic tier list. Godly compounds, test, growth, primo, great compounds, mast, anavar, good ones, nandrolone, insulin, and tren. Okay compounds, anadrol and EQ, and garbage, DHB and dianabol. If you guys want to see me rank something else or have questions about another compound, comment down below. Let me know what you want my input on, or why you think this shit's completely wrong and what your opinion is. I'd love to hear that. On that note, guys, take it easy.